Hello and welcome to Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center's internet show and podcast on the most pressing issues impacting transatlantic relations today. My name is Ilva Tare, a senior fellow here. My guest today is Ed Owen, non-resident senior fellow at the Europe Center, founder of the Power Test podcast, as well as former senior strategic communications and political advisor for several Labour Party members. Ed, a warm welcome to the show.
Hi, Eva. Great to be here.
As you know, and we all know, on May 19th, UK Prime Minister hosted the first EU and UK summit under the new Labour government, which hailed a new chapter for the EU and UK relations amid years of Brexit turmoil. The biggest announcement from the summit was undoubtedly the new UK-EU deal, which we will get into it shortly. But the main question on my mind is, are we entering a new era of rapprochement between the UK and the EU, particularly amid a fractious period in transatlantic relations under the Trump administration? So there is a lot to unpack here. I'd like Ed you to jump right in. What were the summit's main outcomes, and how significant was this summit for the UK geopolitically as well as domestically, given political dynamics at home?
Yes, and your question reflects the range of different influences and aspects of this. So I would try and typify it to say this was a significant move. It was the first summit of its kind since Brexit and since the referendum that was taking place in 2016 in the UK. And it is an attempt to reset the relationships. And I think it's a very important symbolic step as much as anything else. And that is in the context of the wider geopolitical disturbance that we are witnessing. I think that's very important. In the end, the European Union and the United Kingdom need each other. They need each other, as you've reflected on security issues, the threat that has been posed by Russia in terms of the Ukraine war and wider threats, and the potential for US withdrawal from European security absolutely reflects the essential aspect of UK and EU working together more closely on security and defense issues. And one of the key outcomes of this summit was, as you say, deal and the pact, the Defense and Security Pact. There are wider issues that the summit produced, particularly on trade and energy issues. And trade, there were certainly some moves towards dealing with some of the frictions on the economic side that have existed since the withdrawal of the UK from the European Union, and particularly on the issue of greater alignment on agri-foods, which will allow for much more free trade on agricultural food and products between across the channel. That was significant, but of course, I think the overall impact of this in economic terms is relatively modest, but it's with the EU being the UK's largest trading partner by some distance. This is an important part of the UK's approach to boost growth in the UK economy, and also good for the EU.
Ed, how was this summit welcomed or received from the public opinion and the political opponents of Labour Party?
Yes, and of course that's one of the big issues here, isn't it? About the domestic environment in which the UK government finds itself, and that's in the context of the Brexit referendum. Still, there is polarisation in the UK around Brexit, and there are political forces that are keen to maintain some of the elements of that rather damaging debate and series of discussions that took place in the UK for some years, and as you've reflected, harmed the relationships with the EU for some years. There is pressure domestically. The Nigel Farage's Reform Party has been doing well in the opinion polls in the UK, and it did very well in some local election 3 weeks ago. As many will know, Nigel Farage has been the champion of Brexit. So to some extent, there is a there is a pressure from that side. But the UK government has taken the view that seems to be shown by the opinion polls, which is that the British public have somewhat moved on from Brexit and have recognised that that Brexit did do harm and damage in significant areas, particularly on the economic side. The opinion polls do seem to suggest that the public are willing and keen for the UK government to build a closer relationship with the EU, and that's certainly what the UK government will be relying on.
So is it premature to believe in a reset in relations in this post-Brexit area between UK and the US, or may still be a chance?
I think it is a reset. I think it's a reset that reflects, as I said, that change in domestic opinion. I mean, the opinion poll, I don't put great store by this, but the opinion polls show now that the majority of the British public regard Brexit to have been the wrong decision. That's not to suggest that the British public necessarily want to reopen the whole issue of Brexit and the idea of rejoining the EU. I think that not for this time. But this is a reset. It is reflected in warmer relationships that are now taking place between London and European capitals and between London and Brussels. So I think it is a important symbolic and strategic step, which potentially has further value down the track. But this was an important moment.
Sure. What are the key components of the emerging deal between the UK and the EU? I keep thinking US. And how will it impact defense and trade cooperation between the two sides?
So on the defense security, well, the emerging aspects of the deal, and you make the question reinforces one aspect of this deal, of course, is that there are quite a lot of details yet to be worked out. So the deal, as it stands, is in many areas quite general, and there's still going to be a lot of detail, a lot of discussions, a lot of negotiations to take place. So I think that's worth reflecting, Ilva, from the point you make. On defence and security, the Defence and Security Pact will allow for greater collaboration between the EU and the UK on defence and security matters. That's a good thing. It will also, crucially, ensure that UK plays a role, and certainly UK defence industries will have a role to play in the wider EU's rearmament process and programme, which it is now embarked upon. And that's important, one, for UK companies and for the defence forces across Europe, that in the sense that is bringing the UK within that orbit within EU, but it also will enhance greater integration between Europe across Europe on this issue, and that's got to be a good thing. The UK remains one of the, if not the foremost, one of the foremost military powers within Europe, and in the context of the geopolitical environment, where Europe needs to take greater control of its own security, and I don't think there's any discussion now on that. The UK is absolutely essential to that.
Does the new EU-UK defence pact that we're discussing, in your view, open the way for an eventual reintegration of the UK into the single market? Or do you think agreements like this will be limited to sector cooperation?
I think that's in a sense the big question. I think my sense, I mean, and underlying the question is that the economic benefits that the UK gets from this deal are nothing like the benefits it would get by rejoining the single market. So that's absolutely clear. So the question, does this deal make eventual rejoining the single market and potentially a future UK rejoining the EU as a whole a greater possibility? Well, yes, possibly, but I think it's far too early to say that. I think where the UK government sits is that, not least because of its manifesto commitments it made to the British people prior to its election last summer, was that with rejoining the EU is not an option. Rejoining the single market, the customs union, and return of free movement are not options either. Therefore, within those red lines, within those constraints, I think this is an important moment. I think all accept. I think both the EU and the EU accept, though, that this is a first step. There are further areas that there can be bring closer collaboration and cooperation between the UK and EU. And that, of course, has its own memento. I'm not for a minute thinking that a potential rejoining the EU is likely anytime soon, but certainly the closer relationships are one that will benefit both sides.
And how will this new defense pact enhance European security and resilience, especially with regards to supporting Ukraine? How will the UK be integrated into the EU's conception of strategic autonomy?
Yeah, and of course, there are separate discussions at sort of NATO level on this as well. But I think where this is going to be particularly important is on the whole issue of rearmament and how Europe enhances its military industrial base to be able to effectively, over the next decade, develop the capacity and capabilities that can allow Europe to take a more independent, certain and a greater role of its own defense, less reliant on the US. And for the UK is an essential element of that. And I think and I think that was always the view, that was always one of the key drivers of why this rapprochement, if you like, or reset of the relationship has happened. And I think it will be of benefit to both.
Thank you, Ed, for this valuable insights on the EU and UK summit and the potential enhancement of the cooperation between the two. Thank you for joining Atlantic Debrief.
Thank you.